I am posting this movie for Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago and Neighborhood Lending Services of Chicago. This is mortgage fraud. And in this movie, I am showing documents. I am explaining what these documents mean as it pertains to the case of 10-CH-51361. I am explaining to the best of my ability of what I understood of what these documents mean as far as mortgage fraud is concerned against my own. I am not an attorney. I am not giving legal advice. I am going on the experiences that I and my husband have experienced in dealing with neighborhood housing services and neighborhood lending services over the past 15 years, 8 of those years in court. I am still in my home. I still have possession of my home. They have committed illegal activities, and they are trying to obtain legal results by illegal means. And so this is what this movie is about. Thank you. I hope you learn from it or get something from it to help you and your family as well. Okay, the first document that you're looking at, it says mortgage fraud penalties. These are the laws that were put in place by President Obama when he was in office, and it was so much mortgage fraud going on during the 2008 bubble or crash or whatever it is that they're calling it. But this is when that law came into effect, and mortgage fraud carries, if you look at where it says Fraud Enforcement and Recovery Act, it says that a federal conviction for mortgage fraud has a maximum of 30 years in prison and a fine up to $1 million, and mortgage fraud from 5 years to 10 years. So committing these acts can cause you to go to jail. We're not sure why neighborhood housing and neighborhood lending have not been investigated to go to jail, because they've done mortgage fraud. And that's the purpose of this video, so that I can let you all see, for the naysayers, for yourselves, and for those that feel that neighborhood housing service and neighborhood lending service is such a righteous company, and that you don't have to be aware of them. You do, and you need to be aware of all mortgage companies, not just them, but anybody that you get a mortgage from, and make sure that your documents are in order. At the bottom, it gives you a warning on this document. It says, if you know of someone who has committed mortgage fraud, you should contact the FBI. Doing so can mean financial or criminal penalties, and that's my exact desire, is to continue to contact the FBI and let them know that Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago and Neighborhood Lending Services Incorporated, the lending arm of Neighborhood Housing Services, has been doing mortgage fraud for a number of years. Okay, this is the beginning of where I'm going to begin to show you all the Neighborhood Housing Services and Neighborhood Lending Services has had unscrupulous lending practices for many years. This goes back many years. This isn't new. This next document is a mortgage, and every document that I am posting is public knowledge. Everything that I'm posting is of public record. This mortgage is with Neighborhood Housing Services. Keep in mind, Neighborhood Housing Services is not a mortgage lender. They're a 501(c) nonprofit organization that does not pay taxes, and they don't have a license according to the Secretary of State and the Illinois professional regulations. Have license to lend, so they don't have business giving a mortgage. This mortgage is in Sherman Brewster. They've been doing this for quite some time. This is way back in '91, They gave him $38,280. And if you look at the top, it says Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago. The next three documents is part of the mortgage. Information. The first two documents give you the information, and this last document is the affidavit signed part of the mortgage with the signature of the borrower's name on it being affidated. Keeping in mind, this was a mortgage made by Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago. Keeping in mind, Neighborhood Housing Services is not a licensed mortgage lender. They don't have a license to lend and to give mortgages. Thus, they cannot foreclose on anybody because they're not licensed to do so for a mortgage. But this is what they do in Chicago. Now, here we go. This is the second mortgage for the same gentleman, Mr. Sherman Brewer. This is again public records. This mortgage was given on the same day as the last mortgage, but this mortgage was given by Neighborhood Lending Services. And if you look at the top, they were also prepared by the same person, and they were also mailed back to the same person, done on the same date, with the Neighborhood Lending Services in the typed in. This is the bait and switch that I was telling you about. The first mortgage was $38,000. This mortgage is $30,000. As I told you, this company, Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago and Neighborhood Lending Services of Chicago, have been in business since 1974. It is not a mistake that they don't know what they're doing. These titles of the mortgage, who's doing the mortgage, is tight, so they know what they're doing. This is not done by mistake. This is done purposely, and it also is done at the same address. Everything is the same, but nobody addresses this. But this is mortgage fraud. This is the bait and switch. You can't give. Why would they give? Ask yourself the question. Why would Neighborhood Housing Services have to give the same gentleman, Mr. Brewer, a first mortgage in $38,000, and then on the same day give in another mortgage in Neighborhood Lending Services name of $30,000? Well, Neighborhood Housing Services again is a 501(c) nonprofit organization that don't pay taxes. Okay? Neighborhood Lending Services, on the other hand, is not. They are a mortgage lending, and they are licensed with the state of Illinois. So, I wonder what they're doing. Nobody wants to address what they're doing. But as you all remember Acorn, do you remember Acorn? Around 2000, I might be a little wrong, but around between 2006 and 2010, somewhere in that time frame, when all those mortgages were going bad, they dismantled Acorn. Well, this is 1991. They've been doing this for a long time. Why haven't they been addressed? Why haven't they been investigated? Why has Neighborhood Housing Services and Neighborhood Lending Services continued to be allowed to do what they do? Unclean hands, as they call it in court. Is Neighborhood Housing Services and Neighborhood Lending Services attorney, Paul Sarasoli. And this is his card. The next document on here is, this is a document that attorney Paul Sarasoli, a case that he has. And this case was with a defendant, Ronald McKinney. And it says, mortgage note and defendant, NHS mortgagee. Mind you, I said this is attorney Paul Sarasoli. And he's going into court as Neighborhood Housing Services as a mortgagee, being fully aware that NHS, Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago, is a non-profit organization that is not a mortgage lender. They cannot go into court as a mortgage lender. And I'm sure Mr. McKee, I said Kinsey, correction, his name is Mr. McKee, Ronald McKee. I'm sure Mr. McKee didn't know that they didn't have a right to take him into court as a mortgagee, because they're not a mortgagee and they can't do mortgages. It also says here there was a balance due of $21,000, and it says the attorney for the defendant is Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago. So they know what they're doing. They know that they're using two different names when they go in court. I just showed you with the last case of Mr. Brewer that they went into court and gave him in Neighborhood Housing's name typed on their mortgage $38,800. And then they went in on the same day in Neighborhood Lending Service and gave him a $30,000 loan on the same day with Neighborhood Lending Services. There are many cases that is in the Circuit Court of Cook County that Neighborhood Housing had been doing this for a number of years. They knew what they were doing, but I'm going to post it as well, because Neighborhood Housing Services have taught it themselves and have themselves as a reputable company. And because they're so politically connected, they have skated and gotten away. And even now with us, they've done so much fraud in our case, and I refuse not to let them be exposed by their actions. When it comes against us, they will go after us with teeth and toenail. I want you to remember something. Everybody that my husband, because I have not had to deal with anybody because I don't owe them anything. And I've never been in foreclosure. No summary judgment was given on me. None of that. When my husband had to deal with them, every last one of them was white. Every last one of them. But now they got the man out there in Ford Heights, African American man, that took $150,000. And they got him up, ready to send him to jail. He hasn't gone to jail, but he's been indicted. Go figure. This next document is a mortgage note from Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago for $55,200. This was a different person, because I had sent it around. My husband had sent it around, and he had taken off the name. He didn't include the name, but this is their document. And it states on here, the borrower promises to pay Neighborhood Housing Services, and that they understand that the lender may transfer this note, and this note that will be called the note holder. So in regardless of what they try to present, they've been doing mortgage fraud, because NHS from the beginning was never a lender. It was always Neighborhood Housing. It was always Neighborhood Lending Services of Chicago that had the license to lend. But if you're a nonprofit organization and you don't pay taxes, But when you give in mortgages, I wonder, do you pay taxes? I don't know that information. Because if you don't pay taxes as a 501c nonprofit organization, you don't pay taxes. Well then, if you don't pay taxes, how are you giving mortgages? And how are you charging interest? And how are you getting that money as the interest? How are they giving you money and you're not a mortgager? But they tout that they are a what do you call it, mortgage counselor, predatory lending counselor, when they do predatory loans, and nobody's holding them accountable. And then they think that we're just supposed to sit back and let them do what they do, let them commit the wrong that they do, and we allow it to happen. It's not going to happen here, not at all. Now, this next document is a document that they filed in the Circuit Court of Cook County in the Chancery Department. And it's a notice of foreclosure, les pendens notice. Okay? The caption says, Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago, Inc. Okay? And one of the players, in order to do the fraud that you do, you need many players. You need the mortgage lender, the attorneys, the title companies, the banks, the judges. They use the employees, because you can find many documents that come up missing within the circuit court system. Even young attorneys have come in there looking for documents and they couldn't find them. But they use different attorneys to accomplish their goal. And these attorneys are aware of what they're doing, because as you see, I'll point it out to you, when they come into court for Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago, and then come into court as Neighborhood Lending Services of Chicago, attorneys are supposed to go by what you call canon laws and rules of civil procedure. In Cook County, that's a joke to me. They come into court and do whatever they want to do. I've said it so many times. In my opinion, and this is my personal opinion, the Circuit Court of Cook County is bought and paid for. You cannot trust your judges. I have learned that when it comes down to voting time, that I vote those judges out of there. Because when we have to depend on those to do the law and they aren't doing the law, it's difficult to trust or to have confidence in our judicial system. And we are if you continue to listen to what the politicians say, we are a country of laws. And it makes it hard to believe when they don't follow the law. Anyway, this particular document was prepared by law firm Kropik, Pakuga, and Shaw. And they have played a role in many of these, and I will point them out. But that's what this particular document is. Now, this next document is the legal description of the previous case that we just showed you. Because we were unsure, my husband was unsure in the beginning of this process, because we've been fighting for 15 years for this property, going through foreclosure and being in court for 8 years fighting this fraudulent foreclosure on our home. There was no name, and we redacted out the personal information because we were unsure if these documents could be placed in court. But we have that information. I just didn't have it on this document, but what it does show is it said property is commonly known as, and it gives the address, and Chicago is still kept on there, and the permanent tax ID number, which is your PIN number, was on there. It's been redacted out as well. But the attorney's name that was on this case was Kropic, Pacuga, and Shaw. And so it's not like they aren't aware of what they're doing. Kropic, Pacuga, and Shaw knows the difference between going into court with Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago and Neighborhood Lending Services of Chicago, especially when they've been dealing with this organization for a number of years. They know the difference. It's not like they don't know the difference in that. The documents show it. As I make a correction on this particular part of this, earlier I said that Mr. Sherman Brewer was in court. He wasn't in court. These are mortgage documents on both the $38,000 and the $30,000. These are public records, but it's not. I don't mean to say that he was in foreclosure or that he was in court. To clarify it, they gave him a mortgage, one in Neighborhood Lending Services and one in Neighborhood Housing Services. And if he's getting along, why did he need two different entities to give him a mortgage? So I just wanted to make a correction. I just want to make a correction on that. The first loan was in Neighborhood Housing. This is the first loan that they gave him, and the second loan was the Neighborhood Lending. As I said earlier, the Neighborhood Housing was $38,000, and the Neighborhood Lending was the $30,000. So I just wanted to clarify that so that I'm clear. This document here, I really want you all to pay close attention to. It says mortgage foreclosure. Now, I'm going to cut my fan off because I want you all to really hear this. Okay. This document here is cases of mortgage foreclosures. When you look down on the bottom, it says cases filed. It's in bold letters. Cases filed with NHS as the mortgagee by law firm Kropic, Pacuga, and Shaw. It has the dates that it was filed, the department, which is Chancery, the case number, and the judges that's on the case. All these cases were filed by this law firm for Neighborhood Housing Services as the mortgagee. Now, I don't know, and I can't say these judges were aware of what the law firm were doing, but as you will look, and I will point out to you, some of these same judges are on other cases when they file foreclosures in NLS name. To me, that would jar a question. If they didn't know it, they knew it when we went to court because we made them aware of it, because we learned it, and so we told the judges. Now, did they do anything? Well, Neighborhood Housing Services and Neighborhood Lending Services is still in business. So I can't say they did anything about it. This next document here. Okay, this document, the second page, it's cases filed with, and if you look at it in bold, highlighted, bold, it's not highlighted, it's just bold. Cases filed with MLS as the mortgagee by the law firm Cropit, Pacuga, and Shaw. Now, if nobody knew it, the law firm knew it. And the law firm has an obligation to do what's right. They have an obligation according to their rules, but as I said earlier, you will find that those rules is just there for practice purposes or something. I really don't know what they're there for, because they're definitely not followed. And if you look at the judges' name, you'll see some of the same judges that was in the first case with NHS. You'll see some of the same judges with MLS. And then if you look up underneath that, there are several more cases. And this says cases filed with NLS and NHS as the mortgagee by NHS and NLS's attorney, Paul Sarasoli. Now, if nobody knows the difference, attorney Paul Sarasoli does. He knows the difference completely because he's their attorney. I can't say how long he's been with them, but he's been with them at least 30 years that I've searched. Can't give the exact date as when he started, but he's been there 30 years. 30 years is quite a long time. If you look on here, some of the same judges, the case number, the department, which is Chancery, the case name, and the judges that are on here. As I said before, maybe the judges didn't know back then that that's what they were doing. They're judges. I would think that they would, at least something would jar it. Something would say, "This, what is this?" I would question it. But I have to remember that we are living in Cook County. We are living in a highly politically motivated city and state, and it is ran by the machine that has never died. It stays oiled. They keep it oiled, and they cover for one another. One of the judges on here is now in the appellate court, and so it makes you wonder, does it carry over? Does our corruption carry over? Or can we really trust our judicial system? I think not. I don't believe that we can. I believe that we need to get all fresh judges that will hold integrity for the law, hold integrity for the oath of office. Because if not, we all gonna be in trouble. Unless you have a really good attorney, and a lot of us as African Americans that are on fixed incomes or are of low paying salaries can't always afford an attorney. And a lot of times they're not going to even take the cases because it costs so much to do these cases. So a lot of times they won't even take our cases. So then that leaves you to fight for what you know is right. And you have to fight because this is your legacy. This is your inheritance. This is your property. This is your home. This is your livelihood. This is what you worked hard to get. This is what you had your dream set on. And they will come and just take your dream like it's nothing. And it means nothing to them. And they have a long political reach. Neighborhood Housing Services and Neighborhood Lending Services has a long political reach. If you look at my other videos, I've shown what has happened to us at my husband and I at our home, with the police coming to the house when police don't even do evictions in Illinois. Only the sheriff does evictions in Illinois. However, there is some more documents that I will be putting with this short. Okay, this is the beginning of the fraud, the completion, not the beginning, because they've been committing fraud from day one, but this is the completion of it. This was the final completion of the Fraud Act, January 31st. 2017. That was the ending of the case. This is a notice of filing that they placed in the court. They put the date on it as January 31st, 2017, but in actuality, they filed this case February 8th, 2017. For those of you all, as I've said before, I'm not an attorney. I've just learned things because I've had, my husband has had to fight, and I, being his wife, had to fight with him. And so they filed it on the 8th. Whenever you file a document, the date that's stamped, not the date that's listed in typewritten or even handwritten, only the court stamped date is the date of filing. So this was filed after court was done, but this was the only way that they could obtain possession of the property because of so much fraud that they had did within the case. All of the different legal descriptions that they had given and never gave the correct legal description because they were committing fraud, and they never wanted to go back in there and correct it because it would show that they were committing fraud. So they continued it throughout the entire court case, from the circuit court all the way to the appellate court. They used the wrong description even in the judicial sales, and they knew that they couldn't get a deed with the wrong legal description, because you got to have the right legal description. Always remember that in Illinois, I can't speak for other states, but in Illinois, regardless of what anybody says to you, your property is sold and foreclosed upon your legal description, not your address and not your PIN number. Those items mean something because it helps to identify your property, but the identification of your property only is your legal description. And I cannot give you, and I'm not giving you legal advice, I'm just giving you what I had to experience in this process. So that's what I had to experience. So this right here was to help them get a deed, a fraudulent deed. The next document here was to show proof of service and an affidavit. They don't have no problems with signing affidavits and lying. Whatever it takes, that's what they do. They have no problems in doing it whatsoever. It's amazing, and they get away with it. Nobody says anything to them about it. They get away with it. Now, this next document is the amended certificate of sale. Now, I've searched many of the court documents. I've searched many of the court cases. I have yet to be able to find an amended certificate of sale. When you look at what they have in place for foreclosures in the state of Illinois, it's called the Illinois Mortgage Foreclosure Law, 1508, 1507. There's a series of them that anybody going through foreclosures in the state of Illinois, they have to follow the Illinois Mortgage Foreclosure Law. And so if something is sold, the house that's sold is the house that they would get, and they don't go by your PIN number, as I stated earlier, and they don't go by your address. They go by your legal description in order to get a deed from whatever entity they choose. And in this case, they chose the Judicial Sales Corporation, who needs to be investigated along with everybody else. They need to be looked into to make sure that they are complying with the law. My personal opinion, I'm leery. I'm very, very leery, very skeptical. Their owner is Nancy Vallone. She's the president. She's been doing this for quite some time. That you don't do mistakes like this when you've been doing stuff for 30 and 40 years. These aren't mistakes. You know, in the black neighborhood, on one of my documents that I've listed here, it says this is called the RICO Act. But when you have these many players, that's what it's called. It's called the RICO Act. But when you have a political reach, then you're covered. At least that's the way it appears to be in Illinois. And this is something that has been going on for quite some time. Now, this amended certificate of sale was the document before that I showed you, which was the notice of filing. This is what they put in on February 8th. The case was over. The case was in the appellate court. There was nothing to file. Once you go into the appellate court, circuit court loses jurisdiction, and they can't rule on anything until the appellate court renders its decision. And as I've said before, I'm not an attorney. I'm not even a law student. But these are the experiences that my husband and I have had to go through and experience through our judicial system. So this document here it's considered a illegal document, because this document was not heard in the courtroom. It's what they call adjudicated or litigated. It wasn't heard. No judge gave an order for this particular document. So this document can't even be considered because it wasn't before the court. The court never ruled on it. So the lawyer, attorney Robert Haney, didn't have a right to use this document, but they did. And this is how they used this document. They took this amended certificate of sale and went to the judicial deed. Judicial Sales Corporation, correct. I'm correcting myself. They went to the Judicial Sales Corporation, and on this document you'll see Wendy Pinita's name. She is an employee. Now, the first, when they e-filed it, see, they didn't e-file this. And everything has to be e-filed in the city of Chicago, Cook County. This wasn't e-filed. This was placed in there. That's how you know when they're doing stuff, because they place stuff in the system. However, her name is on here, Wendy Pinita, and this is the certificate of sale that they gave. When they gave this certificate of sale, amended certificate of sale, what order did they give Wendy Pinita? What order did they give Nancy Vallone, president of Judicial Sales Corporation? What order was given to that company? Because the company is responsible for ensuring that any documents they get, that it's coming from the court correctly. So what orders did they get to substantiate them giving up a deed? Because they gave up a deed on this fraudulent document. No orders. So how'd they do that? Remember where we live. We live in Chicago, Illinois. And they do what they want to do. Attorney Robert Haney took this amended certificate of sale from the Judicial Sales Corporation, and he filed it in the Recorder of Deeds. That was to place a cloud on the title, to create a problem with the title. And that's what they do. They'll create a cloud on the title, which will cause you to have to go into court and fight it. And you're going back in front of those same judges, and they have the judges waiting on you. So you go back into those same judges. You can ask for what they call a substitution of judge and be guaranteed that it will be denied, because check this out. Most of the time, the same judge that you ask, to what I understand, and I might be kind of wrong, but another judge is supposed to look at it. But I don't believe that happens, because you get the same judge all over again. So anyway, they took this amended certificate of sale, and they placed it into the recorder of deeds. So now this document is placed against, they took an illegal document and did a legal act and placed a cloud on the title by placing a judicial deed against your property. Then they went further. They turned around, and I believe this man is an accomplice. I believe this man is an associate. I don't believe this man is unaware of what he did, because my videos proved that he was aware of what he was doing the day he came to our home. And his name is Giuseppe Sapani. And they claim they sold him, and I will post those documents as well. They sold him my home off of a fraudulent document. Many ask, well, did you get an attorney? Did you try to get? For years, even now. And everybody comes up with, they can't do this, they can't do that. But in actuality, the reach is far. You know, the reach is far. But to God be the glory. I'm still in my home. Because I stood still. My husband and I, we stood still. And we are still in our home, even after all of the fraud. So they're the ones that have to make the next move. And the only move that they can make is to do other criminal activity. Now, we have state's attorneys, and we have attorney generals. We have state senators. Mind you, neighborhood housing services and neighborhood lending services are federally funded. Our senators, Tammy Duckworth and our senator, Dick Durbin, are federal senators, and they are responsible for the federal funds that comes to the state of Illinois. They've both been reported. They haven't done anything. And I didn't expect them to. I would have hoped they did. But as I said, the machine runs well and it's oiled. You have our Attorney General, Lisa Madigan. She's been contacted. She's never done anything. We've contacted our state's attorney, Kim Foxx, who, when she ran, she stated she would not be politically held, and that she would go after the corruption. She didn't go after this, and she's aware of it. Her assistant state's attorney, Wayne Jakowski, is aware of all of the fraud. They went so far, and the trust, they went so far, they've placed all of these documents in the recorder of deeds, and nobody can see any wrong. Nobody sees what they're doing. Nobody holds them accountable to what they're doing. So this is how you have to fight for yourself. You can't depend on them to fight for you. Earlier, I spoke on the document of the cases that were filed by the different lawyers and how they filed it in neighborhood housing and neighborhood lending. On the top of that page, if you scroll back, on the top of that page, you will see laws that we used in the court. And one of the laws that we used were the last two laws, the License Act and the nonprofit public charity. And I'm going to read what this says. The License Act was enacted to protect the public and not to generate revenue. Section 1-2B 205 of the Illinois Compiled Statute 635/12B states that the purpose of this act is to protect Illinois consumers seeking residential mortgage loans and to ensure that the residential mortgage lending industry is operating fairly, honestly, and efficiently, free from deceptive and anti-competitive practices. That doesn't happen. NHS is a 501c3 nonprofit public charity. Under the License Act, no non-exempt person or entity shall engage in the business of brokering, funding, originating, servicing, or purchasing of residential mortgage loans without first obtaining a license from the commissioner, now the secretary. And it gives the Illinois Compiled Statute Law 205, Illinois Compiled Statute 635/1-3A. They don't follow laws in this city. That's for sure. We've learned that. But I hope this has been informative to you all. I hope that you all can use the experiences that my husband and I and my family have had to endure these past 15 years dealing with neighborhood housing services and neighborhood lending services, and to all of the naysayers that have listened to what different people have had to say about what has gone on over here at 2949 West Washington Boulevard, Chicago, Illinois, 60612. Half of them don't know what they're talking about because they're not going to be truthful to them anyway, because there's no way they're going to allow them to know that they were committing fraud and taking people's homes and stealing money. They're not going to let them know that. People that thought they were very close to these people didn't know what they were doing. And so they're not going to know this information. But I want you all to understand this as well. They will go through any lengths that they need to go through. Anytime you can get the president of your organization, I don't know what their mission is and what they stand on and what their beliefs are, but anytime you can get your president of the company to sign a fraudulent document without further checking, or maybe they did check and maybe they did know. I don't know, but I know they signed that fraudulent document to get the deed. And I know that they knew it because I wrote them and told them that this was fraudulently done. They didn't do any of this right. And Kirsten Faust is the CEO, and Robin Coffey is the Chief Financial Officer. They know. They know. But you can be placed in the lion's den messing with some of these people. So I just want you all to be aware. I want you all to be careful. And don't, the old folks used to say, don't believe nothing that you hear and half of what you see, because what you see is not always what it is. And so I just want you all to be aware and protect yourself. God bless you. I will be posting other documents because, as I said earlier, when I first started this, I refuse to let them get away with what they're doing. They did it to others, and I believe that. I believe that they did it to others. But as they say, the buck stops here. The buck stops here. If you take it from me, you're going to have to take it all the way illegally. And I'm going to make sure that I fight for my family as hard as I possibly can. And teach my children to not just let people take something from you and do illegal activities to obtain it. That won't happen. God bless you all, and thank you for listening. Have a great evening. As I was giving you information concerning the documents that Attorney Paul Sarasoli, the attorney for Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago and Neighborhood Lending Services of Chicago, I meant to mention that he cleverly, on documents that we have had, didn't sign his name. There are no documents that, as of recent, that I can tell that he signed his name. However, he's the lawyer for neighborhood housing services and neighborhood lending services. And the attorney that they appointed to handle my husband's case, 10 CH 51361, was attorney Robert Haney of Noonan and Lieberman, who he was first with Kropik, Pakuga, and Shaw. As I've told you all, they have to have players in place. However, attorney Paul Sarasoli had Kirsten Foss, who is the president CEO of Neighborhood Housing Services and Neighborhood Lending Services, had her sign the fraudulent deed. Had Robin Coffey, who is the chief financial officer of Neighborhood Housing and Neighborhood Lending. She's been there since 2009, so it's impossible for me to believe that she has no idea of what has been going on. Had her sign the fraudulent document. Attorney Robert Haney is the attorney that put the fraudulent document into place. He put it into court. He put it into the recorder of deeds and recorded it. He gave it to the judicial sales corporation to obtain a judicial deed. Everybody has placed themselves in fraudulent illegal activity except for attorney Paul Sarasoli. His name isn't on any of those documents, but he's their attorney. How did he let them do it? How did he let them be placed in jeopardy? But as they say with POTUS, the President of the United States currently serving in office, follow the money. They had players from the beginning. James K. Wheaton, Paul Sarasoli. They had players from the beginning. This isn't new for them. These people have been in neighborhood housing for a very long time. So I just wanted to reiterate some of that. And anything that they do from here on out has to be illegal. They have to use a fraudulent document to obtain legal results. In other words, they have to use that fraudulent deed, that fraudulent amended certificate of sale that was not given with a court order. And now, in order for them to complete everything, they're going to have to find a judge that's going to go along with all of the fraudulent activity. So I'm looking and I'm paying attention to what judge they're going to get. Who are they going to use in the Circuit Court of Cook County to go along with the illegal activities that they've been doing? The courts say, and those that come into court must come in with clean hands. And so we're going to see who they get to do what they need to do to accomplish the completion of their fraud in order to take my home from me. We're going to see, because they have to use everything that they've used. They're going to have to get somebody else to help them. So we'll see.